Hello, this is the Librarians of FALA podcast. My name is James. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Elzy Lippman, Professor PhD in Dunology, as you can tell.
Yes, thank you. Well, today we are going to be talking about Dune. Now, Dune, it's my favorite book ever, but it's a landmark science fiction novel, incredibly influential. When most people describe Dune, I think they give like the premise of the first film, but if I were describing the entire universe of Dune, I would actually describe it as it's like in the far future, and it's about the intersection of nature and technology. I think it's a better description than just the first book, because I think that encompasses just everything in it. But how would you define or describe Dune?
Well, yeah, I'm sure you know Dune is a very hard series and book in general to describe in a single sentence because it encompasses so much. But if I had to describe it in the Spark Notes way, I would say it's political ecological commentary disguised as science fiction, really. I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, especially the ecological part.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea is humans have learned not to rely on computers and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff that and artificial intelligence, right? So instead of computers, it's there are these people who mentats, they can store tons of information in their mind, and they're basically human computers, and even the ornithopters. Did you know? I don't know if you've read the Dune Companion or whatever it's called, but inside the ornithopters, there's actually this animal. I forget what the animal is, but it's like some sort of muscle, I think, and that's how the ornithopters move. There's this animal inside it, which
Yeah.
it's interesting, very surreal.
Yeah, a lot of the concepts in it are very, very out there, you could say, just
Very
in how they work.
psychedelic.
Yeah. For sure. Definitely on the psychedelic, considering how much of them the author was doing when writing the books.
So, when did you discover the Dune universe?
I discovered Dune through my grandparents and parents, who had both read the books. This must have been when I was I want to say between the ages of 12 and 15. It's probably when I read the first book. It was this copy of it, exactly, the Barnes & Noble's collector's edition. Just the first book. And I blazed through it. It's the quickest I've read almost any book because of just how engaging it is. And then slowly through there worked my way through the other 5 books of the original saga and read a few other fluff material, you could say, to the universe. And yeah, I've been hooked on the universe ever since then.
Have you read any of Brian Herbert's books?
Only small amounts, like Spark Notes kind of, but I haven't read a lot of them, or really any of them all the way through.
For those who don't know, Frank Herbert was the original writer and creator of the Dune universe, but when he died, his son, Brian Herbert, came on to write the books, and his take on the Dune universe is controversial.
Yeah.
From what you've read, what do you think of Brian Herbert's take on Dune?
What he was going for in writing it. I think he's definitely trying to convey a lot of messages through his stories. One of them is the ecological side of it, Herbert himself got inspired first to write the Dune books, or you could say the beginning of his inspiration for it was seeing how the U.S. Department of Agriculture had used this invasive grass species to hold down the sand dunes around where he lived in Oregon so that they wouldn't blow across highways and cause road closures and such. And so there's a huge focus on the ecological and environmental side in Dune, about ecological change and adaptation through time and such. There's also the next very obvious one is the political side, where it's this universe of multiple bickering political factions all vying for control over basically what is just an allegory for oil in the end. And of course, with, I mean, modern history and such, we can all see the parallels there. But then again, I also just think he's, like all writers, trying to just tell an engaging and fun story through his books. And while it may not be a story for everyone, it's certainly very engaging to those who find it to be.
Yeah, you either find it really boring or tedious and slow. And actually, I think the later books in the series are more like that.
Yeah.
I do love them, the later books, like Chapter House Dune, but
they're a lot slower compared to the first one.
yeah, I think they're much less about the story. Well, the Dune books, there's lots of philosophy in them, but sometimes it doesn't relate a lot to the story. It's kind of like he talks about it, and he'll talk about it for like several paragraphs, and there's very little story to it, actually.
Yeah. It's adding in his own interest in philosophy to it.
And I think it's more like that in the later books. It's like in like the first book, it's like it feels like a sci-fi book with philosophical elements or philosophy in it, whereas the later books feel like a philosophy book that also is telling a sci-fi story.
Yeah, I'd say Children of Dune is where it starts to feel like that, and then God Emperor is where it's just you could probably cut it down a little bit if I'm honest. Even though I love those books, they do have a lot of filler.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say God Emperor of Dune is my favorite, or is the best Dune book, but it is my favorite. It's so surreal.
It is, yeah.
And anyways, you were talking about how his inspiration was the plant life growing over the dunes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar to Children of Dune, where and God Emperor of Dune, where they're worried because the plant life is taking over the desert, and it's to the point of in God Emperor of Dune, it's no longer really a desert, which is that was the thing that I found surprising about God Emperor of Dune. It's not actually dunes.
Yeah, it's the first book in the series that takes a real departure from where the original setting has been. Since God Emperor jumps ahead a couple thousand years into the future from where the third book left off.
What do you think are... Well, because he took inspiration from a lot of things when he was writing Dune, but what do you think are some of the main things?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is Herbert's previous history as a speechwriter for local politicians and campaigns in state level politics, kind of, where he would be the one writing the speeches for the politicians to recite at debates or rallies or whatever. And from that, he himself admits he got a lot of understanding in how to control people through just subliminal messaging through words. And he learned a lot about how leadership and political organizations work in that way. And I think that really shows through in his books, since I don't think I have read a book series that has an as defined and believable political structure as the Dune books do, because all of the factions that operate within this universe, while they are fantasy kind of sci-fi organizations, they all behave in a very believable way and make believable moves that you can see like, oh yeah, they would do that if they were real. And then of course the other side of the ecological part already discussed. And then also I think definitely his like interest in like tribal cultures of North Africa show through, especially in the Fremen and their culture, just just from like the real world cultural influence that they have.
Well, isn't it also that in the lore, like they are descendants of?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that would track then if they are the real descendants of those people.
Yeah, it's interesting because it takes place so far into the future, but it's always making references to our time.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Carl Jung?
Yeah. I've read a little bit. I'm not super versed, but I know enough.
Well, Frank Herbert was he took a lot of inspiration from Carl Jung, who was a psychologist who was all about like the subconscious, you know. A lot of people, specifically people who are like new to the series, right? There are a lot of descriptions, or not descriptions, a lot of comparisons, like more like on like the money side of like selling Dune. A lot of people compare Dune to Lord of the Rings. I don't think they should. Yeah.
I can see where it comes from. It kind of fits into a similar area of it's this like landmark piece within its own genre that is very identifiable in how it influences that genre. And of course both are classics and are very highly regarded as so. But I think Dune is far different from Lord of the Rings, whereas Lord of the Rings, it's very story based. It's very based on Frodo's journey and his quest to destroy the One Ring, whereas Dune is far more about the message it conveys. Whereas there is great messaging in Lord of the Rings and a lot of great stuff there, Dune is entirely about the message it's trying to convey, whereas it's using the story to act as a vehicle for that message. So they are very different books. And also I think Lord of the Rings is just a lot more approachable of a book for new readers compared to Dune, at least.
Yeah, well, Lord of the Rings, it's telling like a story of good versus evil. Right? And I think one of the main differences in the story is that in Dune, it's not what Dune is. Dune is all of the characters are kind of
they're very gray.
Yeah. But also I think Frank Herbert and Tolkien's writing styles are very different as well.
Yeah.
You know, Tolkien, his descriptions they're really elaborate.
Yeah, very flowery.
Yes, whereas Dune, just very...
It sounds like it was written by a bureaucrat at some points. Herbert is very straight to the point on most of his descriptions. He doesn't include much poetry, really, in his writing, whereas Tolkien is a very poetic style of writer.
What do you think of Frank Herbert's writing style?
It's very interesting because, as previously stated, as a speechwriter, he's very good at saying a lot in a few words, as in like getting a lot done within a certain word count. So it's very hard to read his writing sometimes because he packs a lot into a small amount of writing, but it makes it very interesting for like rereading the book. Like the second time I read Dune, I caught a whole lot more from it that I just missed over in the writing. A lot of that too is because he's very quick and straight to the point on most of it. He'll stop here and there for some descriptions of stuff that need it, but for the most part, It's very to the point. He doesn't spend a lot of time dwelling on things. So sometimes descriptions or small details will just pass you by entirely because it goes too quickly. Which I think works for Dune, specifically because Dune isn't about like really the grandeur or like the kind of floweriness of the universe. It's not about the spectacle, really. It's about really the small, contained human stories within it that lead into this wider message. And I think his style of like to the point kind of simple writing really lends to that because it makes it feel real. It makes it feel like it exists in our universe and not some crazy fantasy world like Tolkien's, where I love Tolkien's writing, but his writing is very much like it feels like it belongs in its own world. It's not ours that we're reading. Whereas Dune, you're like, oh, this is our world just many, many years into the future.
And
Someone's calling me.
a lot of people, they think that Dune is really long. It really isn't. It's kind of medium-sized. I think the thing about Dune is, yeah, it's so like to the point. His writing style is so like that, like so much happens in one chapter.
Yeah,
that it feels longer than
it is.
it actually is.
Yeah. Are you referring to like the series as a whole or just the first book?
Well, a lot of people his writing style in that way is the same throughout the series, but
Yeah.
a lot of people, they think the first book is longer than it actually is.
No, yeah, the first book isn't very long at all. I mean, I'm gonna show the camera. It's not at all a very long book. I think it took me like 2 months to read it, and like in the last week or so, I was blazing through chapters at a time because it was so engaging. But it's a very manageable read. I don't think it's like beyond anyone who has the skill to read it. It's certainly shorter than Lord of the Rings is. Lord of the Rings is a massive book, and Herbert tells basically as much of a story as Lord of the Rings in a fewer page count because of his writing style. He doesn't include the flowery descriptions that Tolkien does. But I think overall as a series, Dune can be quite long, especially if you're committing to reading the entire original saga, which is the 6 books Herbert wrote. It can get it can become kind of a drag as you go through, especially considering that the later books are a lot more slower than the first one, and some of them are even longer too. So I think if you're committing to the whole series, Dune can be quite a pretty difficult thing to tackle. But if you're only reading the first 2 books, maybe it's quite manageable, I'd say.
Especially the second one.
Yeah, the second one's pretty short.
Yeah. Which I like that about the second one.
Yeah, it's short and sweet.
So going into the lore, one of the, I'd say, God Emperor of Dune. It's so strange, but there are these people called the Fish Speakers.
Yeah.
Now,
it is very strange.
Yeah. How do I describe them? They're there's this guy. He's the God Emperor. He's this like worm human hybrid kind of. Not exactly. He was born human, and he sort of become a worm over, several hundred years. But he has this giant army of women called the Fish Speakers.
Yeah, an all-female army. And Herbert spends a lot of time in God Emperor of Dune explaining the exact details on it, and he uses it through the lens of Duncan Idaho, who's this lieutenant to the Atreides who's been revived and died like hundreds of times throughout his life because he's just such a useful servant. And he gets revived in God Emperor Dune for another time, and the God Emperor Leto has to explain to him over again because he doesn't have the memory of his past lives, like what's going on. And Duncan, as like this lieutenant for previously in his own memory, has been like all male armies and very classic like military structures. It's very different seeing the fish speakers, since even though they are an all-female army, they do not operate like an army at all. They operate more like a cult, really, which we can see in like a couple of scenes where it's not like a classic military organization. It's kind of this weird hybrid between this religious organization and military. This military. So they kind of act as like both preachers and soldiers in that way. But it's a very strange concept. And obviously, this is when Herbert started doing a lot more drugs writing his books.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You can kind of tell, but so it lends itself even more, I think, in God Emperor Dune to like sell how foreign this world is, especially for like Duncan Idaho, who kind of acts as like the reader's kind of self-insert into the situation, since he's new to this part of the world and he's never seen it before, so he acts as the way to explore it through the exposition. Since God Emperor Dune diverges very heavily from what the first three books were. And so I think having the fish speakers as this like very foreign idea, this very strange, otherworldly kind of form of what a military is, it sells like how far this has come from the first three books. It's been thousands of years since the end of the third book to the beginning of the fourth book.
Do you know why they're called the fish speakers? I looked it up one time, but I forgot what it.
Yeah, it's explained at some point in God Emperor, but
I'm pretty sure it has something to do with like a dream.
Yeah.
A dream sequence.
Yeah, one of the dream sequences. And it's also probably related to how Arrakis becomes a water planet as the changing ecology evolves. But yeah, I think it's a small detail that I probably missed over.
Duncan, Idaho, yeah. You were saying how, he keeps getting revived, how in the first book he dies, and then he comes back in the second book, and then he dies in the third book, and then in God Emperor of Dune, he comes back, but he'd been revived several times.
It's revealed he's been revived hundreds of times because Leto keeps keeping clones of him around to act as advisors.
And then he's also in the fourth book, and the fifth book, and the sixth book.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people would say that he's the main character of the whole series. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure about main character, but I think Duncan's purpose as a whole throughout the series is to act as the through line, since all of the books span, especially in the later books, they start spanning thousands of years, and many, many different stories happen within those that we don't see in the writings. But having this one character that's established and we get to know really well in the first book, having him in all of the consecutive books allows us to keep a semblance of structure within the wider overarching narrative, since it'd be kind of jarring to go from Children of Dune to God Emperor Dune, where Leto's the only one remaining from the third book, considering that he's gone through so much of a transformation as this worm human hybrid that it's kind of hard to recognize him as the same character from the third book. But when Duncan is revived, every time he's revived, he's still technically the same Duncan from the first book. So he still acts as that same character to make it more of a digestible transition from one book to the other, having this same character that we know throughout all of them.
That's true. So in the first book, well, you had a question that you want to talk about is Leto right for what he does?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this the first Leto or Leto the second or?
No, this would be Leto the second.
Mm.
Yeah, I should have specified that as in uh, committing to the hybrid and
Oh,
accepting the transformation of the sand trout and
the
such.
golden path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, if I'm right, it's been a while since I've read the later books. I'm currently rereading through them. I'm on God Emperor right now. But if I am right, we don't ever fully understand what the alternative was if he chose not to go down the golden path. If I'm right?
You might be. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's insinuated is that without the golden path, all of the worms would die out and there would be no spice and humanity would be ever fractured through these multiple small different worlds and forever divided that way. And so, as far as I think, taking it upon himself to make sure that the sandworms continue in a way through him and keeping humanity together as a race and like trying to foster them into this new generation of understanding. I think he is correct in that, but it's this, once again, it's Herbert's brilliant writing coming through, and how he portrays characters is very gray because Leto has to also become this all-powerful god emperor with complete and absolute rule over all humanity as like the most powerful tyrant that's ever lived.
And it takes like a toll on him.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of why his father Paul didn't
Yeah. Uh-huh.
go on the
And
golden path.
Yeah, Paul saw the path and didn't want to accept the consequences of it.
So I was saying how in the Dune universe, there's no computers. There's
Yeah.
no artificial intelligence, and that's one of the things that makes Dune so original. It doesn't rely on a lot of the same concepts that most science fiction does.
Yeah, it's very unique in the sci-fi universe by not having that idea of like super advanced technology. There's like advanced technology in Dune, sure, but it's nothing too incredibly far removed from what we have now. Like even with how advanced like the las guns or all the spaceships are, they operate in a way where we can see how we could make that work in our own universe. Whereas like AI is still kind of this crazy otherworldly thing that kind of sets it apart whenever it appears in other stories.
Yeah, but even with the las guns, because if somebody has a shield, the las guns cause an explosion and kill everybody. So even then, it doesn't really rely that much on las guns.
No.
Yeah, it's still hand-to-hand combat, which is
yeah, it's this weird thing where in the future people have reverted back to fighting with swords and spears. Which
it's so cool.
Yeah, it makes a cool like kind of cross between the fantasy and sci-fi aspect of it.
But, what do you think of the Butlerian Jihad, which is
this
is the event that in the backstory of Dune, it's when humans killed off all of the robots. It's the reason why there aren't any computers and why there aren't any AI in the universe. But what do you think of that?
Well, in the story, the Butlerian Jihad is taken as this kind of necessary evil to kill off the computers so that humanity can actually ascend to its highest level, where they can unlock their true potential in the mind, where relying on computers makes humans slaves to those computers, which I think is a very interesting concept Herbert was tapping into, considering that this was like well before the explosion of the internet and such. And some could even say that Herbert kind of foresaw this future where humans are so reliant on technology that it's almost kind of a part of us, and we've kind of twisted the human form to also require this computer aspect to it. Whereas in the story, one of the wider arching themes is to push humanity towards its absolute potential as a race, and one of the requirements to do that is to eliminate all of these computers and AI intelligence, since it's kind of seen as this corruption of the human form and something that holds us back.
Hmm. I would say the Dune universe is biopunk.
Yeah, I can see that.
I kind of imagine it as like, it used to be cyberpunk, you know?
Yeah.
I can imagine like Blade Runner fitting into the Dune universe, actually. And we're like, you know, that's before the learning jihad and before all of that. But now we've moved on from that, and it's... Anyways,
Yeah.
what do you think of the Tleilaxu?
The Tleilaxu. So, for the viewers who don't know, the Tleilaxu are one of the kind of organizations / guilds within the Imperium in the Dune universe, and they specialize in pretty much cloning of people is the easy way to say it. Golas are what they called in the books, and they're pretty much carbon copy clones of dead people. They also have like these weird bio enhancements on their own people that allows them to like shape change, kind of the face dancers. So they kind of act as, like, I would say, probably asides from what is it, the Ixians. They're the most science fiction part about the Dune universe, I think. This guild that's entirely responsible for like this genetic tampering and biological enhancement of human beings, and the cloning of some in in a lot of it. And so I think they kind of act as well, obviously they're a required part for having Duncan Idaho appear up in all the books, since they're the ones that keep cloning him all the time. But I think they are mainly there to add, aside from Duncan's overarching story, they're there to add more flavor to the universe as a sci-fi world, being one of the multiple imperial factions vying for control in the wider scheme of things.
But the interesting thing is, they're also kind of dying out.
Yeah.
They choose like only to breed with their own race. They don't like they won't breed with any of the other factions, and so they have all of these like genetic problems and so they're necessary for the for the world building, but I think it's interesting that like they it's
a neat little like addition to the universe to have them as such a prevalent role there, with how kind of strange they are, and kind of how out of place they are even in the Dune universe to an extent. Because even when you have like stuff like the guild navigators that have been so genetically modified and twisted by the spice usage that they look more like fish than they do like humans, it's even still then kind of weird to have this entire basically race of people who are just that, and these kind of twisted semi-human creations that can like change their faces, and like they're kind of they don't have like wrinkles or anything. They're kind of like this uncanny valley sort of mannequin looking creature. So they're first introduced in the second book, in Dune Messiah, which I think is a great way to like kind of show the different threats and different possible enemies there are for the characters in the books, especially considering that now you have ones that are so much of a wild card as the Tleilaxu.